and seeing ways of changing it. And this reflection on action is, I think, a very important dynamo, if you like, of finding new ideas. Then playing around with ideas, just trying new things out, not just accepting things as they are. Maybe you have a textbook, a course book. Okay, you can play around with your textbook. Don't just do it as it is. And by doing that, you start to discover new things. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? This, I think, is a very, very powerful area of for innovation, for finding new ideas. Other people, other teachers. We have these informal chats, maybe over a coffee in the staff room or a cup of tea, and you talk about what you're doing, you talk about what you've seen, what you've read, new ideas that you might have thought about. These can spark new ideas in you. Another area is observing. I've learned a lot from just watching other people teach, for instance. Other teachers do things differently. And sometimes we can learn a lot just by looking at the way another person teaches. I remember years ago, I learned such a lot from a man called Earl Stevick, who was an American applied linguist and teacher, in fact, more of a teacher. And he taught me one very, very important thing. He said, can somebody mute? The important thing is you present something and then you stand out of the light, he said, and let them learn. So instead of constantly intervening, teachers love talking. I'm talking too much. You should be able to do the input and then see how things work out. So other people can teach you a lot. Continuous professional development, CPD. Obviously, there are many ways that you can do this, either by following courses or going to workshops, doing your own reading. These kinds of things will generate new ideas also. And obviously, joining an association like the one that you're in now is very, very important. Going to conferences. The main reason that I go to conferences is not really to listen to the plenary speakers, although of course I do listen, but the main reason for going is so that I can meet lots of other people and get ideas from them. And it's a fail-safe. Every time I go to a conference, I know that I will meet somebody who will teach me something, and that's great. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? Now, in practical terms, these are some of the things. Sorry, could we just go back to the last slide? I forgot to say something. Yeah. What I haven't put on here is our students. And we can learn so much from our students. There are some people from Ghana here, okay? So I tell you a story about Ghana. I lived in Ghana for 5 years. And most of the work I did was with primary school teachers. And one year we were doing a 1-month training course with primary school teachers in a place called Winneba, which is about halfway between Accra and Cape Coast. And we had our program, and we were doing our program like anything. And then all of a sudden, some of the students themselves said, can we do something about the deer festival? There's a very famous deer festival in Winneba, where the young men go out in the morning and they try to catch a small deer. And they said, we want to make a drama about this. And those kids took over the course for a while they made puppets, you know, out of newspaper and seamstresses' cuttings. They invented a play, and they presented a play as a puppet show, and it was absolutely wonderful. We learned so much from those kids. You know, they were 10, 11-year-old kids, and we got so much ideas from them. So don't forget your students. Your students can teach you a lot too and give you new ideas. Yes, next slide, please. So in terms of the kinds of areas where we can work on finding new ideas, heuristics are a very powerful way of doing that. Now, what do I mean by a heuristic? A heuristic is what we call a rule of thumb. It's not an algorithm, you know, do this and this will happen. And a heuristic is, let's do this and see what happens. So there are all manner of heuristics. One of the most interesting ones, and one of the most famous ones, in fact, is do the opposite. This was mooted by John Fancelow, who was an American teacher, but he spent most of his life in Japan. Do the opposite, he says, in a book he wrote. His book was called Breaking Rules. So what does he mean by doing the opposite? First of all, we have to realize what we're doing anyway, because a lot of the time we're not aware of what we're doing. So first of all is to see, what are my habits? What do I do all the time? Do I always stand at the front of the class and speak? Do the students always sit in the same places? You know, do I have these routines which I go through? And he says, once you've done that, try doing the opposite. If you always teach from the front of the class, go and stand at the back. If the students always sit in the same places, ask them to sit in different places every time. You know, if you always do things in a particular way, try doing them in a different way. Now, he doesn't say this will work. He doesn't say this is a wonderful solution for all your problems. What he says is, if you don't do this, you will never know. So why not try it? That's the important thing. You know, let's try it. The second thing is reversing the order of things. If you always do things in a particular order, try changing the order, reversing it. For example, in reading, we usually read a text from the beginning to the end. How about changing that? Read it from the end to the beginning. This may seem strange, but actually, skilled readers do this. If I read an article, for example, I read the introduction, but I go straight to the end. And then I read it backwards in order to see whether it's worth reading. So reversing the order of the way you do things. Changing the pace, doing things more quickly or more slowly, leaving more time or less time for things. And this can also have very innovative effects. Changing the mode or the manner of things, how you do things. For example, if you're working on vocabulary, one of the theatre techniques that I use, for instance, sometimes, is not to present the word in writing, but I ask the students to make the word with their bodies. So they make their bodies into the shapes of the letters. okay, this might seem strange. It's certainly a new idea to many teachers, but it actually helps the students to internalize the word in a way that they wouldn't do otherwise. So changing the mode or the manner is another one. Combining things randomly. You know, there was a group of people called the Surrealists in France. They did a lot of things by simply putting things together which don't belong together. And then you find a connection. So, for example, you might you might take a five pictures. You pick them from magazines or wherever. You don't choose them with an idea in mind, and then you offer the 5 pictures. Okay, what do the students do? They make a story out of those 5 pictures. That's combining things randomly. And you can do the same thing, for example, by having 2 columns of words, nouns in one column and verbs in the other. And you can put them together in any order. And that gives you some very interesting new combinations. Repeating things differently. Very often, I know we still do this, although people don't admit it. We do get our students to read or to repeat things in class, but instead of asking them to do it with a normal voice, why not ask them to do it in different voices? Softly, whispering, loud, with drama. You know, you can get people to repeat things differently. That makes repetition more interesting. You know, repetition in itself is boring. You've got to try and make it interesting, and this is one way of doing it. Another way is by withholding information. So you give part of the information, and the students have to find the other part. And there are a lot of heuristics on top of these, but I just wanted to offer you those as an example. Okay. Could we have a look at the next slide, please? Thank you. By re-exploration, I mean taking a practice, an activity, which we all know about, and finding new ways of doing it. And there are many examples of this around. I've started with dictation because there's a very well-known book by Morgan and Rinvolucri, which is just called Dictation. And they took the idea of dictation and they found 76, I think, different ways of doing dictation. You know, the normal way of doing dictation, you read a part of a phrase and then you pause, and then you read it again, and then you read the next one. Okay, that's okay, but it's pretty boring. How about some more demanding ways of doing dictation? So they looked at this and they come up with, as I said, over 70 ways of doing dictation. One way, for example, is that they wrote the dictation on the back of on paper at the back of the classroom, and so students in turn had to go back to the back of the class, read one sentence, remember it, bring it back to their group, and dictate it to the group. A very much more active way of doing dictation. Another way of doing it was to read the text at normal speed, slow normal speed, no pauses for writing down. So you read the text once, the students write down any words that they can think that they can remember afterwards, and they, in groups, they exchange, and then you read it again, and they fill in, and gradually, They build the text. And you won't believe this, but usually, even with quite a modest, lowish level group, you don't have to read the text more than 4 times. And then they have made the text, and in a way, they inhabit the text in a way that they wouldn't do if you did it by an ordinary dictation approach. So that's just one example of dictation. Repetition. You know, as I said just now, repetition is dead boring if you just do repetition. But you can get students to do repetition in much more interesting ways. And looking at, for example, when they are in the dictation activity, for example, when they are trying to put the text together, what they're doing is repeating without even realizing it. You can think of new ways of doing drills. Mark Helgeson, for example, in Japan, who's an American who lived in Japan most of his working life, has some very, very interesting ideas about how you can make drills more interesting. Rote memorization. People, of course, many people will say, well, you shouldn't ask people to remember things by rote. And I would agree if that's all you're doing. It depends partly on what you're remembering. Is it worth remembering? And if you can put it into a context, for example, where you are performing a short text or a short skit or a dramatized thing, then the rote memorization comes into its own. Questions. I think the whole area of questions is open to a lot of re-exploration. You know, many of the questions we ask are simply display questions. You know, what was this person's name in the text? How many times did they go to the dining room? You know, those kind of questions. But what are more interesting are probing questions like, if you had been this person, what would you have done? Now that means you have to have really understood the text that you're reading, and you have to have processed it in a much deeper way. So questions is a big area, I think, that we could explore. Translation. Translation is also one of those practices which is frowned upon by many modern experts. But translation, of course, is inherent in using more than one language. I speak 6 languages, and I, of course, translate to some extent from my own language. And I sometimes translate between languages. It's normal. So we can look for ways of making translation a productive activity rather than simply, you know, a really rather dull and routine activity. One person who's written very interestingly about translation is an ex-colleague of mine in France, Françoise Grelet, who has written several books, and my dear colleague, who is now dead, wrote several books on translation, Alan Duff, and they brought translation alive. Stories, another area which can be done in many, many different ways. My old friend Andrew Wright is an expert on storytelling, story making, how you can do this in many different ways. So it's well worth doing that. Reading and reading aloud. Again, areas which are open to re-exploration. How can you do reading aloud in a more interesting way, for example? And literature. I'm a great fan of literature. Many people don't take kindly to literature, but actually literature opens up the whole world to your students. They may not be all that interested in the narrower things that we're trying to teach them, but literature offers them the world, in fact. So we can re-explore that. And I've done that in 1 or 2 books as well. And these are just some examples of possible re-explorations. Okay, could we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, by feeder fields, what I mean by feeder fields is this, that these are areas outside applied linguistics, outside language teaching, outside our narrow ghetto, if you like. And it's interesting that many of the things that we have adopted in English language teaching or in language teaching are taken from other fields and originally. You're all familiar with functions and notions and speech acts. The whole area of communicative language teaching comes from this, but that didn't come from linguistics. It came from philosophy. There was a very famous Oxford philosopher called Austin, who wrote a book called How to Do Things with Words. And that was a kind of seminal, influential book in the thinking of people about how can we teach language as doing something rather than simply as knowing something. Some of you may have come across the silent way. Not many people use it these days, but the silent way came in from mathematics. Caleb Cateno, who invented the silent way, was actually a mathematician. And he brought in these ideas that you could make language visual by using colored rod. Community language learning, again, this is Roger's idea. And Rogers was a psychologist. And Rogerian counseling is still very, very important. Community language learning depends on the counseling idea that you wait for somebody to ask to say something before you start trying to shape it. Suggestopedia was another one of these special innovative methodologies, and that came from psychology. A man called Lozanov in Bulgaria invented it. And psychodrama came from a psychological theory of a man called Moreno. And if you look at CLIL, I'm not sure whether CLIL is something that you're familiar with, content and language integrated learning, that is, learning a language through learning a subject. That didn't come from linguistics, it came from general education. So we're looking at various things that we do now, and the ideas didn't come from within, they came from outside. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? So here are some more recent possibilities of outside areas of interest that can play into our profession. Multiple intelligences, this idea that we don't have, this is Gardner, we don't have just one kind of intelligence, you know, rational, mathematical, logical intelligence. We have many intelligences, 7 perhaps, 8 maybe. We have, you know, artistic intelligence. We have, you know, interpersonal intelligence. There are many kinds of intelligence. NLP is another area related in a way to that, neuro-linguistic programming. And a number of practitioners have tried in various ways to apply the findings of these areas into language teaching. Information technology, of course, you know, everybody is very, very much aware of the importance of information technology, and it's become even more important following the COVID, the COVID time of stress and danger. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, perhaps, we would not have been doing this, what we're doing today. There would not have been a way of doing it, but now there is. You know, that's a piece of a new idea, if you like. How can we communicate with people all over the world at the same time? Well, what comes out of that? Zoom. That's one thing anyway. Sorry, can you go back there? There we are. Okay. So information technology, if you're interested in information technology, there are a number of recent books on this by Nikki Hockley, for instance. And I'm going to leave with Brenda afterwards. I'm going to leave a reading list, so anybody who wants to check on this can do that. Neuroscience, you know, how does memory work? How do we formulate ideas? You know, all of that, which is becoming, I mean, people are trying to investigate the nature of consciousness. What does it mean to be conscious? It's what is called the big problem. Because nobody has so far been able to explain, you know, how we turn our brain matter into thought. You know, the two things, there is a relationship, but we don't really understand it. Okay. Art and music, my goodness, so much can be done there. At the moment, I'm working with a group of interested people on creative writing, for example, and we're looking at ways of integrating art and music into poetry. What is the relationship? How can we do this? How will it make it more easy for people to relate to a poem if they have music that goes with it, or if they have a picture that goes with it, and so on. Another area is drama, drama techniques. I wrote a book with my dear friend Alan Duff. It was published in 1974, before most of you were born, I suspect. And what we tried to do was to look at actor training, the way that actors are trained, and see if there were techniques that we could use from there and transfer them into language teaching. And so we wrote a book called Drama Techniques, and it proved to be absolutely astounding, the results that you could get. I put clowning here. You might find that rather odd. When I talk about clowning, I don't mean circus clowns. There is a tradition of theatre clowns in Europe, when the clown usually says nothing. A friend of mine in Germany, a man called Peter Lutzker, he's actually American, but he lives in Germany, has been investigating this idea of using clowning as a way of training teachers. It's amazing work, because what is a clown? A theatre clown, what does it do? What does he do? A theatre clown does nothing. Theatre clown stands in front of the audience and waits for something to happen. And when something happens, the clown responds. It's very difficult to do. Very difficult, but it's very rewarding. And Peter Lutzke compares that sort of clowning with being a teacher. Because what does the teacher have to do? The teacher has to respond to what happens in the class. You may have your lesson plan, fine, yeah, great. But we all know that the lesson plan usually goes out of the window within about 5 minutes because something happens. And the good teacher then knows how to respond to what happens. And that's what teaching is about. It's about responding to what happens in an appropriate way. So there, clowning, very important. Voice, I have been a proponent of helping teachers with their voices for many years now. Unfortunately, there are very, very few teacher training programs which incorporate voice training, which is very, very sad, because one of the teacher's most powerful tools is his or her voice. You know, when you think back on teachers you had in the past, one of the things I remember anyway is what they sounded like and whether they were interesting or not, whether their voices captured my attention and held my attention. So those kind of things, very, very important as well. More recent, that's an area of voice training, which I would say should be brought in into central teacher training. Critical thinking, creativity theory. Okay, I could say a lot about these, but time is going by, so I better move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. From creativity theory, just an example of that last one, these are some of the things which emerge if you want good ideas to happen. You need time. You know, creativity doesn't happen like that. You need time for it to mature. So you need time. You need unstructured play. In play here, I'm talking about playing around with things, you know, trying things out. And you need interaction with other people. You need to make new associations and combinations, as we've been seeing. You need for it to be relevant, going back to what I said at the very beginning. And you also need constraints. And this is something which many people don't really understand. If you are trying to create something, having constraints, having rules is actually helpful. Let me give you an example. I write haikus a lot of the time. A haiku is a Japanese kind of verse form. If you don't know it, it's a syllabic poetry. So in the first line you have 5 syllables, second line you have 7 syllables, third line you have 5 syllables. That means you are very constrained. But in a way that is a support, because you know the framework that you are working within. And then you have to start thinking, okay, what is the sentence or the line that only has 5 syllables and it says what I want it to say? And then 7 syllables. How does that relate together? And 5 syllables again. So it's actually very demanding, but it's also very supportive. And having constraints is in fact a positive thing, not a negative thing. People think that creative writing is letting it all hang out, write whatever you like. That's rubbish. And that's what you will write, rubbish. if you do that. But if you have some constraints, you know what you're doing. You're working within these constraints, and the constraints can support you as well. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? Oh, this is just an example, if anyone's interested. Chris Stillman did a couple of these things on language teaching insights from other fields, and he looked at things like sports and arts and design for ideas, taking in ideas again from outside. So we're still looking at this idea of bringing things in from outside. One of the more recent things as well has been positive psychology. That's a whole area. Positive psychology, some people call it happiness studies. And Mark Helgeson in Japan, for example, has worked on this, produced a book on it. How can you bring happiness studies into your teaching? It's a very interesting idea. I like it. Try it. Thank you. Okay, the next one, please. Now, if we were looking for other new developing areas that we could call upon, they're pretty obvious, I think, many of them. Corpora, websites, social media, these are all things where we can draw in things, and people are doing it the whole time, of course, because everybody seems to have a handheld device now, and they're constantly playing with it. Self-access. How can we get people to do independent learning? And of course, this has become very important with the COVID pandemic, because a lot of people have not been able to go to school. And so they've had to find ways of learning independently, learning to learn. Teacherless learning, that's an interesting new area. Sugata Mitra is an Indian scholar, not just a scholar, he's actually a scientist. And he did something very interesting in a poor part of Delhi. He put in a wall some computers, and he just left them there. And kids came along and started to play with them and learned how to use them and taught themselves English while they were doing it without a teacher. That sounds like a dangerous idea, doesn't it, if you're a teacher, because you might lose your job. But looking at this, on the list of references, I put one of his TED Talks about teaching in the cloud, as he calls it. And obviously, we can learn a lot from that in the way that students find out how to learn on their own, rather than being told everything. Csikszentmihalyi is a name that nobody can spell or pronounce almost. Invented or discovered or made popular this idea of flow states. Now, what is a flow state? Flow state is when you are so absorbed in what you are doing that you forget that you are doing it. And so the whole idea of trying to develop in our students flow is very important. You get them so involved, so committed, so engaged in doing something that they forget that they're doing it, and they are learning without realizing that they're doing it. So that's a whole area that really is well worth looking at. Creative writing, I mentioned already. I'm extremely interested in creative writing. Many people say, oh, kids, the students, they can't, how can they write creatively? They can't even write their name. you can, in fact, find very, very simple activities, and they produce the most extraordinary results. Most extraordinary results. You have to have faith in it. Global issues is something which has come up certainly in my recent career. By global issues, we mean obviously issues to do with the fate of the planet, extremely important. So it links up with critical thinking, it links up with crap detection of various kinds, you know, and many teachers' associations now have a section devoted to global issues, and I'm very happy about that. I won't say any more about literature. More and more demand for young learners teaching, and for advanced learners. Advanced learners have been kind of neglected, I think, over the years. You know, most course books take you up to a certain point, and then you plateau. But demands on English now are extremely high. And so we have to try and find ways of helping learners go beyond that plateau that they reach relatively easily and become fully functional in English. Demand high teaching is an interesting idea developed by Jim Scrivener and Adrian Underhill. The idea is that, you know, since communicative language teaching came in, everybody has been, you know, very happy doing fun things. Fun things are important, of course, but are the students learning anything? So they're looking at finding ways of redoing activities in a slightly different way so that you put more demand on the students. And the last example I've given here is the flipped classroom, which many of you will have heard of, I suppose. And the flipped classroom really is, the idea is that the students do their lesson, prepare their lessons outside class. So the presentation and everything, they do that. And then they come to class. And when you're in class, then you can work with what they have prepared. It's a very simple idea. It's not new either. But people like to give these things new names. So that's the flipped classroom. Okay, can we move to the next one, please? Yeah, I mean, this is just how do new ideas spread? This is an interesting book by Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, and how do new ideas spread? And he says we need three kinds of people. Connectors. We need people like yourselves, probably, who have a lot of people that they know, the people that they can influence because they have good networks, okay? And then you need what he calls mavens. Mavens are experts. These are the people who, you know, are so into something and they get all the information about it that they possibly can. And then you need salesmen who will go out and popularize it by talking about it, by writing about it. And that will ensure that the idea will spread. He talks about memes. A meme is the mental equivalent of a gene. In other words, it's a good idea that spreads. And interesting book, The Tipping Point. Yes. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to say some things here which you probably won't like very much. I have been a practitioner all my life, and I am deeply suspicious of research. I don't discount the research, but I think that we need to take it with a pinch of salt. First of all, teachers and researchers have different agendas. Teachers are interested in teaching, researchers are interested in researching. And the two don't necessarily link up. Secondly, research findings are largely inaccessible to ordinary teachers. If you're an ordinary teacher, you already have a very heavy workload. And you are not likely to be able easily to access the latest research, partly because it's in a journal that you can't afford to buy, or that it's written in language that you do not easily understand. So there are many research findings inaccessible to ordinary teachers. A lot of research is trivial in the sense that it's pseudo-research. By this, I mean that there is pressure on university staff and on PhD candidates and the rest of it to produce a research thesis. And they will scratch around until they find something and then they will do it. But it's not necessarily something that is either useful or something that, is going to be of any importance to anything. And even when something significant is discovered, it's routinely ignored. An example would be research on the best age to start learning. Now, ministries of education, parents, and all the rest of it want their kids to learn English or another language as early as possible. There is no evidence that supports the fact that it's a better idea. The evidence points rather that it's better to start around about 12 years old. But that finding is ignored routinely because it doesn't suit things, policy or whatever. So somebody asked me, don't you think research bridges the gap between research and classroom practice? I think it can, but most teachers, or many teachers, don't have the time to do the action research. It's not something that is topmost in their minds. They're getting through the day. And so although action research in theory is a very good idea, in practice, it doesn't always happen. And I'm very sad about that because it has to do with, it's related to something I spoke about earlier. I've been talking about, reflection. Well, reflection, it can be based on classroom research, but only if you have the time to do it. So, research can be a source of innovation, but it's disproportionate to the result, I think. Anyway, you can disagree with me, I don't care. Next one, please. So if you want to develop new ideas, what do? Well, first of all, you have a good idea. And then you try it out, if you can, in class. It's possible I'm getting a bit dark. I'd better put the light on. Sorry, in England, it's starting to get dark about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You try it out, refine it, personalize it, localize it, customize it, because it's intended for a particular group of people in a particular place. Share it, talk about it, talk to people in your school, talk about it at conferences, write articles, set up a website, get your idea out there, then possibly interest a publisher, perhaps as a resource book. And then if you're really lucky, you incorporate it in a course book and you retire as a millionaire. Dream on. Anyway, thank you. Can we have the next one, please? It's finished. That's the end. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for listening. And it's been a pleasure to be with you. I've seen a number of people from a large number of countries, and I'm very, very happy to have been given this opportunity to talk to so many people. So thank you very much. Over to you, Brenda.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. And if you have questions, anyone you want to ask Professor Alan some question, Professor Maley, please. Anybody?
I have a question. Hello.
Hello, you're in Nicaragua.
Yes, I am in Nicaragua. Nice to meet you, and thank you for such a wonderful webinar. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask you, besides congratulating you for your webinar, I wanted to ask you if, well, how could we do if we would like, or I don't know if you give any maybe consulting to English institutions, or how could we get some maybe some support from you, or to work with you hand by hand in case English institutions would like to research on a specific topic, or maybe improving the curricula. So that is a question that's on my mind.
Well,
in this moment.
I think
Thank you.
rather than trying to give you an answer like this, you know, off on the hoof, if you send me an email afterwards, I think my email is available. If not, it can be made available. If you ask me, then I might be able either to do it myself or put you in touch with somebody who might be able to help. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Belinda, I don't know whether my email is available. If it isn't, you may make it available. Yeah.
And can we share your slides with the participants?
No. Yeah, sure. There's nothing much about them. No,
okay.
I'm looking at the meeting chat. I'm sorry, my eyes are off to the side.
So do you want me to read in the chat what they have?
No, I can see it.
Okay.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah. I think the interesting thing, you know, and why you know, I'm 85 years old now, so I don't have to do this kind of thing, but it's always a great pleasure, you know, to be in touch with teachers who are still teaching. I'm not teaching anymore, but I still am deeply interested in it, and I'm very interested to see, you know, what other people do, and particularly across countries. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for people to be in touch, I think. And as I said at the beginning, I think you learn a lot simply from being in touch with other people who are doing similar things, but not the same. One of the things I didn't say right at the beginning is when I was talking about, you know, what was it? Reflection, other people. And if you can find somebody or more than one person to work with, someone you're on the same wavelength with, more or less, I think you find this enormously productive. Many, many years ago, I worked in Yugoslavia when there was a Yugoslavia. That was around 1960 something. And while I was there, I met a man who worked in the University of Novi Sad in the north of the country. His name was Alan Duff, and we hit it off. You know, there are people you know that you can get along with, and we got along very, very well. And we had a lot of fun as well. But we had great ideas. We had great ideas because we kind of sparked ideas off each other. And I still remember when much later I'd invited Alan to come and work for me when I was in Paris, working in Paris. And we would go off together to run workshops and things. And then in the evening, we sit around a table and have dinner and drink lots of wine and have lots of fun. And then we would, you know, they have these paper tablecloths in France, in some places. And we would write our ideas on the tablecloth and then take them away. And I still remember on one occasion, we wrote a book after dinner. I mean, we didn't write the book, but we had all the ideas that we wanted to put in the book. And there they were on the tablecloth, and we folded the tablecloth up, took it away. And of course, it took us another few months to write the book. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you find somebody that you really can relate to, two minds are better than one. And you make a lot of developments by doing that. Yeah, something I wanted to say. I forgot about it.
Thank you.
Are we all done?
Okay.
I have a question.
You do? Okay. Where are you? Ah, there you are. Okay.
Yeah, Prof. This is Samuel
Hi,
from
Samuel.
Ghana.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
We spoke before.
Yeah, Prof. Yeah, thanks so much for such a wonderful presentation. People who have reached giant positions in life like you, I'm sure have defeated a lot of giants. I mean, in the academics, right? And you have talked about the fact that there are stages of the evolution, I mean, trying to bring out your ideas and all that. And I want to find out from you, growing up as an intellectual in the academia, how have you managed your doubting critics, and how have you dealt with people who have tried to oppose your ideas in an attempt to bring those ideas into the limelight? Yes, yes.
Well,
Some
you
of
know,
us would like.
there's no easy answer to that. I mean, occasionally it's happened that, you know, somebody might have attacked me or people like me for having certain kinds of ideas. And if that happens, then it's possible to write a response. You can write it in a journal. You know, if they have attacked you in a journal, then you can reply in a journal. And if it's in a conference and, you know, somebody is disagreeing with you after a talk or even during a talk, then you can deal with it there and then. I mean, I don't worry very much about that, because obviously not everybody is the same. And not everybody has the same opinions, beliefs about what learning is supposed to be like. I have very firm ideas on that, and I will defend them if people attack them. But I'm not unduly worried about it. You know, I think people have to make up their own minds. It's a long time, you know, when I was younger, I thought I could convert the world, you know, but now I know I can't. So it doesn't matter so much. I think if people confront you with a reasonable criticism, then that's fine. You can answer the criticism. If, of course, it becomes personal, then I try to avoid that situation. I don't like, conflict on a personal level. It's not important, especially now. Important thing is to have a happy life. Yeah, if possible. Maybe I haven't answered your question very well, but
okay, yes. Thank you very much. In fact, I'm very grateful.
thank you.
Yeah, for the response.
Professor Maley, you have got a question in the chat from Dr. Mansour Ali. How teachers can develop students' creativity and creative writing? Please briefly explain.
Yeah, well, I mean, the best way of doing it is to do it, of course. If you're going to do this, for example, creative writing, you need to read about it a bit. You need to find some very simple techniques, which you can use even with learners who don't have a lot of language. And then you simply do it. I mean, you learn it as you go along. Let me give you an example of a very simple creative writing activity. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Okay.
Yes.
Somebody's nodding, at least one person, so that's all right.
Yes.
Juliana Vasquez is nodding, so I know it's okay. Here's a very, very simple creative writing activity, and I sometimes start my workshops with this. It's called hello, goodbye. So you ask the students to write the word hello on the paper, and then below it, you leave a gap, and then below it, you write goodbye. And then you say you're going to write a poem now, but all you have to do is to find 2 words to complete your poem. So it's hello something, goodbye something. But the 2 things have to be related. So you might, very, very simple level, you might say, hello day, goodbye night. Okay? Hello summer, goodbye winter. Hello rain, goodbye sun. These are very, very simple ones. You can do, even with a very limited vocabulary, you can do those. But then perhaps you might want to do it in a slightly more complex way. Hello cigarettes, goodbye lungs. Okay. Hello honey, goodbye money. Perhaps. All right. Hello law, goodbye justice. Think about that one. Okay, so you can, it can be very, very sophisticated, or it can be very, very simple. And it's a lovely way to start, because everyone can do it. Everyone can do something. You're not writing Shakespearean sonnets. Okay, you start off very simple. And that's how I do it. And then I have other activities. I have, hundreds of activities, which are all very, very simple. And that gets them into the idea of creative writing. If you want more creative ideas, you need to take a look at 1 or 2 books. There are plenty of books around. There's a very good book by Chaz Pugliese, for example, called Being Creative. But there are any number of books, and I will put some of them on the reading list that I leave with Brinda at the end. Okay. So what are we doing now? Are you there, Brenda? Brenda?
I'm here. If there are no
Okay.
questions, so what we are going to
Okay.
do, I'm going to ask Anik, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Anik. Anik, can you, from IELTA Mauritius, can you present this certificate of appreciation to Professor Maley, please?
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Maley, for showing us that indeed we can transform our teaching from routine practice to novelty approaches. So this certificate is gracefully presented to Professor Maley in recognition of his dedication and passion in sharing his professional journey with the teaching community.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Really enjoyed meeting everybody, although only very briefly, but very nice to meet you. And it's always inspiring when I get to see, you know, how many teachers there are, you know, getting involved in this way. Really, it's so encouraging. So good luck to you in your work. I wish you the best. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor, for the presentation.
Anik, can you just present this certificate? This is just for those who help us, for the team. It's just read it. Thank you.
Certificate of appreciation is proudly presented to Ms. Brinda Rangashomi for her contribution and support during IELTA Mauritius 4th International Webinar on this Monday, 5th December 2022 via Zoom.
Okay, thank you. But this is mostly for, thank you for the team, for the Mauritian team who has helped. And now this is for the participants. Can you read it?
Certificate of participation is proudly presented to all the participants at this session for the active participation in IELTA Mauritius 4th International Webinar entitled Where Do New Ideas Come From? Presented by Professor Alan Maley on this Monday, 5th December 2022. Thank you so much, participants, for attending this 4th webinar organized by IELTA Mauritius. Thank you all for your questions.
Okay. Now,
Thank you.
if there are anyone, we have members, we are honored to have some members of our board, International IELTA International. So if Dr. Neil or anyone, Miss Juliana, Miss Nyamala, if you would like to share something, and also anybody who would love to say something, comment on this webinar, please. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you, Brenda, for giving the opportunity. Thank you so much, Prof. Alan, for giving us the insightful information regarding creative ideas. It is indeed very crucial, especially I'm teaching in elementary school. So it's quite difficult to, you know, train the students in order to think critically, but it comes naturally as I'm doing teaching. So I don't worry so much because the students, as what Chomsky said, they have this LAD. So I believe that they will learn gradually as the lessons are being taught to them. As I see, the students are progressing well, though I can't see tremendous progress, but at least they are progressing here and there in order to complete the task assigned to them. Thank you so much, Prof, for giving us this opportunity in getting more insightful information for us to practice in the classroom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So anybody, thank you, Miss Nyamala. And anybody else from the ambassadors, anybody? We have Mr. Salman Rajput, Mr. Ebenezer from Ghana. Anybody who would like also to share? Anything, any comment?
Yes, Brenda, on behalf of the IELTA board, I think Nachi is also here. I'm Juliana Vasquez, Dr. Alan. It was a pleasure for all of us to have this wonderful opportunity to hear from your own words, the variety of contributions that you provided in today's session. And I know that some of the ambassador here and the audience were very interested into directing their next research in one of the fields that you were providing. And when you were talking about that active research have to be done, like to fill in the gap it's missing in between research and what we write, I totally agree with that, because we teachers, actually, we have to divide ourselves in multiple pieces in our classrooms. And actually, we would like to apply multiple research in our classrooms as well. But the times is not enough. And actually, some institutions, they don't support. We know that research is important because with that we discover, right? We discover new things that can be helpful for our teaching practices. However, well, we don't receive no support. That's why I also want to remind to all people here that IELTA is looking, seeking for that. And I know Brenda knows it. That's why she's very engaged into, bringing us these opportunities of receiving knowledge from people like you that really, really were in depth with these kind of fields and areas, and it's worth to listen someone like you in your age. You were saying, no, me, because I'm not still teaching. I retired, but what you brought today is fruitful, significant for many of us. Remember that we also have the IELTA journal, so anyone who's here who would like to publish or bring insights related to their own research in the classrooms, we are open to receive your papers. Remember, right, to IELTA research. And they're also for issues that we have in our own journal, so you can get benefited from it. Thank you so much, Dr. Maley.
Thank you so much, Miss Juliana. Thank you very much for your message, for your comments. So thank you so much. Let me go and share this. Anybody else would like to share? Okay. So thank you.
Brenda.
Okay.
Brenda, can I
Muna,
say
Muna, yes.
if you don't mind?
Yes, Muna, you can.
Okay. First, allow me to thank Prof. Alan. Indeed, it was really very beneficial to be here and to share your experience among us. I really appreciate it. In my opinion, also, I reassure that being a creative teacher, we should teach from heart. Because also from heart and using the senses that we have, because each one of us would see anything, but not everything. So each one of us would see a point and not the whole image. Each one of us would hear something. So I would go through teaching and researching at the same time. That's my way of teaching. I've been teaching 3 years, but you can't imagine how glad I am and really honored to get a lot of information and really interesting points that I'm going to add them my teaching skills. We are really thankful as from IELTA Lebanon. Also, we thank you also, Mrs. Brenda, for giving us the opportunity to meet Prof. Alan over here in such really an interesting webinar and very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muna. Thank you, Muna, for this comment. Thank you very much. And so I think Okay, so we'll end here. So we ask Rajendra, if you're here, would you like to kindly give us the closing remarks from you? If you're here. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear.
Yeah, so I won't say much. I think everyone has been really appreciative of the talk by Professor Allen, and what I've really appreciated is that there's so much to unpack from the presentation itself. There's so much that has been said about the different stances the teacher brings in and the different ways that you can just diverge from the usual practice. And I think that's the interesting thing about being creative, like to know where do you situate yourself right now, and how do you do the small changes that will bring about, you know, that creativity to come about. So this is something that I've really appreciated throughout. It's a question of challenging yourself also, and also looking around. I think there was one point where the prof was saying about like you have to adapt. You have to think, you can't just situation. So think of your learners, think of your situation, think of your context, think of what you're trying to teach. And I think that's the most important thing, that the innovation shouldn't be at the expense of the learner. It shouldn't be just to, you know, look very brilliant and to get a prize, but it's to make the difference in the life of your learners. So for that, I really thank the prof and thank everyone involved for the discussion that we've just had.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajendra. And so I think we will, we'll end now. And we just want to say thank you. Thank you to Professor Maley. For me, I just want to say, I didn't want to say anything. I just want to conclude to just say that it was like a dream come true. I was just, I remember a presentation on creativity in the classroom based on the book written by Dr. Maley, Professor Maley, and okay. And today we have Professor Maley with us. So this is something wonderful. So I have so filled with gratitude, and to have somebody like him come here and present for us. So it's thank you. And for me, he's a mentor, and we can look up to him and learn from him. And thank you very much again. Thank you very much. Yeah, before we go, maybe we can you can take a picture, a screenshot, all of us, if camera on for the souvenir. Yeah. So we always put our, how do we do that? Reaction, a heart. We always have a heart. So I can take the screenshot. Camera on, if you can. If you can. Thank you so much. Yeah, because this is beyond our expectation. Yeah, thank you very much. So now we'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye,
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye, Brenda.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.